Like a grand and miraculous spaceship, our planet has sailed through the universe of time.
Like a grand and miraculous spaceship.
Grand and miraculous.
Grand and miraculous.
I think with the Muppets, there's sort of an innocence to them, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that appeals to the child in everybody. Because I think everybody is a child in everybody, still.
Well, we all want to build a time machine, don't we? So when you enter Disneyland, you're entering a time machine.
I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing, that it was all started by a mouse.
Well, I guess I should add myself. Hey, everybody. Hope you're doing great. Welcome to Grand and Miraculous, episode 19. It's hard to believe we've gone through 19 episodes so far, but tonight is a great one. We're going to talk about a beloved attraction. We're going to have so much fun tonight. But I want to start off by saying thank you for being here. It's hard to imagine getting through 19 episodes, but we're here and we're going to have fun. Let me hit up chat before I do anything else, because we got lots of folks in chat, and I want to say thank you to everybody. Beaker and Honeydew, first in chat, thank you so much for all your support. Appreciate everything you do. Lamons Gray is in the house. Hey, Lamons. Jason Thibodeau. How's it going, Jason? Udalali Lane. Hey, Kate. Thanks for all your support. Scrolling down. Mike Beachman is in the house. Hey, Mike. Debbie Bernfeld, the one and only. Thank you for being here, Debbie. I appreciate you sharing this out. It means a lot. Mr. Pete McDevitt. My understanding is that you had you sent some folks over here from your show, so I'm very grateful for that. Thank you so much. And folks, if you're watching me and you're not subscribed to Pete, please go fix that. Go subscribe to Pete. That's just the right thing to do. Mandy Mary's in the house. Hello, Mandy Mary. Thanks for being here. Scrolling down. Miss Kay Bell, my stepmom. Hello, Kay. Hope you're doing great. Mima WH57. I think I know who you are, but unfortunately, we're dealing with some YouTube oddities where your handle is showing and not your name. But I'm very grateful you're here. Theme Park Casuals in the house. Hey, TPC. Look what I got on. So I'm proudly wearing my Park Streamers Hangout. If you guys don't follow Park Streamers Hangout, please do. It's a phenomenal show. They had a great talk last night, and everything TPC does and Bob and Cordy do are just magnificent. Dave Strygand is in the house. Hey, Dave. Hope you're doing great. Mr. Designs for Film, my father, John F. DeGear Jr. Hello, Dad. Let's see. Listen, Neil is in the house. Hey, Neil. Hope you're doing great. I saw your comment about Spaceship Earth. Thanks for trying. And I think that's good for now. If I see names that I haven't called out, I'll be sure to come back to you. So for those of you who are new to this channel and watching this for the first time, thank you for being here. This is our mission statement. We are here to unveil the magic behind theme park attractions, exploring their creators, their immersive worlds, and the moments that keep us coming back with your voice shaping the journey. I want to reemphasize that we're very, very, very close to 500 subscribers. That's a big milestone for this channel. We're not here for subscriber count or things like that. We're here to celebrate the attractions we love. Having said that, I'm human, and it would be fantastic to get over 500 subs. So if you could help me out, that would be amazing. Please just share this stream out, hit like, do all the usual things, and we'll have a big old party once we pass 500. I haven't updated tonight's banner, but I do have trivia for you tonight. So as you know, we're talking about Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. So the question for tonight is, there are several scenes in the Florida version of Mr. Toad's that are unique to both sides of the attraction. We're going to talk about this a little bit, but in case you didn't know, the Florida version of Mr. Toad's has 2 tracks, completely independent. And they're slightly different experiences depending on if you go on the left side or if you go on the right side. And the question is, what is the unique experience that you have on the left side? And what's the unique experience that you have on the right side? So with that in mind, let me encourage you to share your memories of Mr. Toad's. This is a ride that many people know and love, and it would be fantastic to hear some of your experiences. I'm actually going to roll tape later on the actual attraction because it's so short. So when we do that, you can share your opinions then or now. It's up to you. And of course, please do go to the website, grandmiraculous.com. There's no and in it, just grandmiraculous.com. And tonight's entry code is MOLE, M-O-L-E. And that's Mr. Toad's friend. So I thought that would be a good code for tonight. So go to the website and we'll talk about our usual way we do things. Let's get into it. Let me share my screen and share our usual deck and throw it up here. So Mr. Toad's, this is an attraction I've been looking forward to for quite a while, not just because it's a beloved attraction, but in many ways, this attraction is why this channel exists. It's arguably the simplest attraction of all, and yet it's been there for more than 70 years. 70 years. That's incredible. Think about that. How can an attraction that's so utterly simple at the core of it bring back people over and over and over again for, the better part of a century? That's incredible. And we're going to talk about that tonight. So what do we do here? We evaluate theme park attractions. And I want to remind you that this is very subjective normally. However, I'm trying to make it a little bit less subjective by tearing or teasing these attractions apart into 3 different axes. There's immersion, there's storytelling, and there's delight. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that, how it works out in a bit. Let me move on to how these are represented. These are represented through radar plots. So if you go to our website on grandmiraculous.com, you can see about 17 or 18 attractions up there already with your votes. So you can see how each attraction is stacking up. I'm pretty happy with how things are shaping out with these 3 axes. I may make one small surgical change next week, but we'll talk about that later. Keep in mind, this is not a monologue. As much as I spend up here, it's been 19 hours for me to talk to you guys. But at the end of the day, my opinion is just an opinion. And this show can't succeed on its merits unless you chime in. So please do go to their website, grandmiraculous.com, use the code MOLE, M-O-L-E, and you can contribute your own voice. And we'll take a look at how it went next week. Last week's test track episode went pretty well, and we got a rating in the high 7s, which is pretty good. But we'll see how Mr. Toad's fares. Keep in mind, we're a proud member of the Disney Streamer Network. So at any time of day, you can go to dsn.disneystreams.com and you can see all kinds of interesting streams happening. We're very happy and very honored to be part of that. And keep in mind, as I usually do, I like to call out a charity. In my particular case, I love the Lake Buena Vista Historical Society. Hey, Brian and all those guys. Hope you're doing great. And by the way, if you haven't seen Brian's viral video from yesterday, he did a takeoff in many ways on the new news about Soren, which maybe we could talk about later if there's time. So anyway, those guys are amazing. Please go support them. They do great work. So, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Let's talk about this beloved attraction and how it's lasted for so long over the years. First and foremost, as we do, I like to highlight certain Imagineers, certainly not all of the Imagineers that worked on the attraction, but I like to highlight some key ones. And yes, we're going back to Mr. Claude Coates again. This is probably the Imagineer you've heard the most of during this show, and rightfully so. Claude had his hands in so many core, amazing attractions. And he, I won't repeat his biography. Suffice to say, he was an amazing artist, and he left his personal touch on so many great attractions, including Mr. Toad's. Ken Anderson. We talked about Ken way back on episode 1 when we talked about Peter Pan's flight. If you may remember all the way back to that episode, we talked about how Ken was responsible for the final design of Peter Pan's flight by holding a toy pirate ship and swinging it around. So Ken was also instrumental in the creation of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, of course, also an opening day attraction. And Rolly, our beloved Rolly Crump, obviously he had a significant impact on the Florida version of this attraction, which we'll be talking about quite a bit in a little bit. And I have a good video of Rolly, courtesy of Retro WDW as well. So let's get to our usual facts and figures. There are only 2 instances of this attraction. There is one in Disneyland. It's still open to this day. Like I mentioned, it is an opening day attraction. So this has been around for more than 70 years, believe it or not. The Magic Kingdom version of the attraction, we'll talk about that in quite some depth. It opened on October 1st, 1971, along with the rest of the park. And it sadly closed September 7th, 1998. And we'll talk about some of the reactions that people had. Let's just put it that way for now, about the closure of Mr. Toad's in Florida. Where do we begin? Well, we have to begin with the novel. In 1908, Kenneth Graham introduced the world to the Wind in the Willows. Now, this was a gentle but mischievous tale of Riverside friends like Mr. Toad, Mole, and all the rest. Now, Mr. Toad, of course, you may recall, was wealthy, impulsive, and utterly obsessed with motor cars. Toad embodied both the thrill and the folly of modernity, because what he brought to the table was we can all imagine ourselves in his place, where we feel like we are so enraptured with either the latest gadget or the latest app or what have you. And the moral of the story was what happens when you let your obsessions get the better of you. Well, this story was a blend of whimsy, danger, and redemption. So this was an irresistible candidate for Disney storytellers decades later, and eventually for Imagineers trying to bring his wild ride to life. Of course, Disney came along in 1949, and they brought Mr. Toad to the screen in a movie called The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Now, this was an unusual film in the sense that it was 2 miniature films pushed together. We had the story of Ichabod Crane, and we also had the story of Mr. Toad, but they were packaged together. The Mr. Toad side was narrated by none other than Basil Rathbone, who you may recall was famous for playing the voice of Sherlock Holmes on the radio. I guess they felt they needed a proper English voice to narrate Mr. Toad. Well, this was a whirlwind of slapstick and charm. Their animators leaned into Toad's manic energy, filling the screen with motion, exaggerated expressions, and all kinds of comic chaos. If you've seen the cartoon, or the movie, I should say, mention it in chat, because not many people actually have seen the original, and it's definitely worth a look, because it really gives you insight into the character of Toad and why he's seen as so beloved yet so obsessed. Suffice to say, this was a cartoon world that would later translate perfectly into Fantasyland, as we'll soon see. Now, a lot of people may ask, why Mr. Toad? You know, there's so many classic Disney characters that you could mine from, so many different stories, so many different movies. Why did the Imagineers go to Mr. Toad? Well, keep in mind Fantasyland's ultimate concept. This was a storybook land where guests could step into animated films. When Walt envisioned Fantasyland, he wanted guests to step directly into these worlds. But not every story in Fantasyland had to be a fairy tale. Mr. Toad was great because he brought something different. Slapstick chaos, manic energy, and a crazy joyride. And this contrasted beautifully with, for example, Peter Pan or Snow White. His obsession with motor cars was absolutely perfect for a ride system that would whip guests around through sharp turns and sudden surprises. In a lot of ways, Mr. Toad was almost the perfect choice to show that Fantasyland could be whimsical, mischievous, and of course, just a little bit wild. Now, Toad's obsession with motor cars is how we define Mr. Toad. More than anything else, he's defined by his obsession with these vehicles. In the original novel, the mania is both comic and tragic because it shows that he's a symbol of reckless modernity crashing into the quiet traditions of the countryside. His joyrides bring him to ruin again and again and again, but he never truly learns his lesson. And I think some of us can relate with, at least to a small degree, with some of that. For Imagineers, this trait was completely irresistible. He gave the ride a thematic core that translated perfectly into a chaotic ride. Every sharp turn, every painted gag, every crash in the attraction was rooted in Toad's gleeful, unstoppable love of the motor car. So it was a perfect theme. Of course, this was an opening day attraction. On July 17th, 1955, Disneyland opened its gates, and among the original attractions was Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Now, this was built on a shoestring budget. This ride leaned heavily on plywood flats and theatrical lighting. Very, very budget attraction. This was no Indiana Jones or Rise of the Resistance. Let's just put it that way. But what it lacked for in technology, it made up for big time in personality. Guests were whisked around a very slapstick environment, from countryside to courtroom to calamity. It was short in length, but the ride's humor and surprise ending made it an instant favorite. From day one, Mr. Toad proved that storytelling and charm could win the day over spectacle. Now let's talk about the people a little bit behind the plywood and paint of Mr. Toad's. Behind some of these things were some of Disney's most inventive Imagineers. For example, Ken Anderson helped shape the story. Of course, we talked about Claude Coates as well. He brought his painter's eye to the color and perspective that made it feel alive. Bill Martin engineered the track layout, squeezing maximum chaos into a very tiny footprint. And Robert Matty, he's famous for creating the mechanical shark for Jaws. He lent his technical expertise to this attraction and especially to the vehicles. Together, this team embedded the philosophy at WED at the time that creativity, not budget, was a true engine of magic. Now we got to talk about the construction of the attraction. Mr. Toad's was never about lavish sets or crazy technology. Imagineers leaned on very, very simple stuff. Plywood flats, simple, two-dimensional pieces of wood. They were painted with broad strokes and theatrical perspective. Of course, they put this under blacklight, and these flats came alive. Any of you who have been on Mr. Toad's know what the plywood scenes look like, especially when they're lit up in that way. Under blacklight, this tricked the eye into seeing depth where there was none. Remember, these are flat 2D scenes. The result was a ride that could shift scenes in an instant. So you could be in the English countryside and then into a courtroom within an instant. What might have seemed like a limitation became the ride's greatest strength, in fact, a reminder that imagination, not budget, is the true currency of what you can do with an attraction. Now, the layout of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, you can consider this to be a masterclass in economy. It's a tiny footprint, yet you wouldn't know it when you ride the attraction. In less than 2 minutes, guests are whisked from the quiet English countryside into the chaos of London. So you burst through Toad Hall, you careen into pubs and courtrooms, and then you finally find yourself on a collision course with a speeding train. And we'll talk about what happens after that, of course. Now, what happens after that? We all know what happens after that, and we got to talk about it. This was the most surreal finale in Disney history. Yes, this attraction sent guests into hell. This was very unique amongst all Disney attractions. Just when you think it was over, the ride delivers its most infamous twist. It sends you into hell. There are flames, there are devils, there are surreal imagery that surrounds you. And this finale is both equal parts shocking and hilarious. It's so funny to go through this attraction and realize that, yes, you're in Disneyland, and yes, the things around you at the moment are actually what you're looking at. You can see a picture courtesy of the e-ticket up in the upper right about what this section originally looked like. Of course, they eventually added some more 3D characters and so forth. So this finale was both shocking and hilarious. This ride doesn't just end. It leaves you laughing, happy, and bewildered, and you want to go on it again and again. So in that sense, it was just a gag, but it was a gag that worked. And I think the shock value of it is definitely one of the reasons why this attraction has the love that it has. Now, there's one trick I want to point out here, and that trick is increasingly narrow passageways. If you if you go on the ride, and we'll watch it in a few minutes, this ride seems to follow a linear constrictive path. What's interesting about it is that you start off in Toad Hall, where it seems normal, it seems very spacious, there's lots of space. But as the attraction goes on, the scenes become tighter and tighter and tighter. When you go through Toad Hall, to the river, to crooked trees, through the warehouse and the railroad. And this message is clear. Toad should not have been so crazed, so fast, and disobeyed the signs, and of course, gone to hell. What this technique does is that it makes you feel more and more and more manic and more crazy as the attraction goes on. And it works really well. There's a great quote in E-Ticket magazine where they say, with subliminal messages like these, it's no wonder the ride has remained popular all these years. Eventually, there was a big Fantasyland redesign, and we talked about this redesign in previous episodes. In 1983, Disneyland got rid of the medieval look and embraced a storybook kind of village style. So Mr. Toad's Wild Ride was no exception. He was given a stately new manor, a beautiful manor, and it was modeled after Toad Hall itself. Now inside, the Imagineers refreshed the paint, the lighting, and the sound, but ultimately the ride's 2D flats were kept intact, along with the chaotic humor. The result, it was a ride that felt familiar but renewed at the same time. And this was a living bridge between Disneyland's past and its evolving future. This is a very careful balance of preservation. It would have been probably trivial to argue that we get rid of all the cheap plywood flats and put 3D caricatures all the way through the ride. Well, they chose not to, and to good effect. They chose to rely and continue that tradition of the flat 2D flats in this attraction. And that's why it still feels fresh and authentic today. We should talk about the sound design and voice work as well. Now, sound was in many ways a secret ingredient behind this ride. Imagine if you could riding this ride with no sound and no effects in the attraction. It wouldn't feel alive at all. It would feel like you're going through a bunch of 2D plywood flats. It was a screech of tires. It was a honk of horns. And it was a clash of splintering wood. These really brought the ride to life. Character voices, of course, added personality, and there were snippets of music from the 1949 film that tied the ride back to its roots. Every gag was punctuated by a perfectly timed effect. So without its soundscape, this attraction would have been a quiet drive through plywood. But with it, it became a riotous, unforgettable adventure. And I hope, if I do nothing else in this series, in highlighting these aspects that we don't often think about. What would this attraction be like without its lighting? What would it be like without its sound effects? Which aspects of these attractions really rely on some of the other senses that you go through? It's not just all sight, and the other senses are just as important as anyone else's. And of course, we got to talk about the vehicles. These vehicles were characters in their own right. Excuse me. Each one is named after a figure. So you could get Toady, you could get Mole, you could get Ratty, and so forth. And of course, Toad himself. Now, these cars were oversized. They had bouncy suspension, and it made every ride feel reckless, as if you're barely in control. Now, it does have a steering wheel, but the steering wheel doesn't actually steer. It just gives riders the illusion of motion. Of course, it's a ride on a track. The steering wheel doesn't actually do anything, but it gives you the impression that you're in control of this crazy car. So the steering wheel is in many ways very important, kind of like the steering wheel on motorboat cruise. Someday we'll talk about that one. Now, over the years, these cars have become classic kind of icons, and they are actually been sold at auction, for example. Now, they embody the spirit of the ride, charming, mischievous, and a little bit out of control. The ride mechanics are straightforward. This is a ride that's a very short ride. It's 1 minute, 38 seconds. That equates to about 700 people an hour. So it's not a huge capacity ride, but it pushes people through. There are a total of 12 cars on the track. There are 9 on the ride and 3 in reserve. Now, Bob Gurr, of course, you know, he chimes in and on anything that moves at Disneyland. And he has a great quote. He says, "I often tell the ride operations people down there, don't touch the equipment on the Mr. Toad ride. They're the only original parts left at Disneyland." So a lot of this attraction still remains from 1955, while many other attractions have been essentially replaced wholesale. And each vehicle has a 1/4 horsepower electric motor, and it gets its power, of course, from the rail down beneath. Before we go on to Florida, let's take a ride, shall we? So I'm going to put up the attraction, and while we watch, go ahead and punch in your perceptions of this ride and what you remember about it. And there we go. That's it. So if you take anything away from this attraction, what I'd like you to think about a little bit is how come this very, very basic dark ride with 2D plywood, how did this attract such a loyal and devoted following amongst fans? It goes to show you that you don't need a $200 million behemoth e-ticket ride to really capture the hearts of people. So think about that as time goes on. Now we've got to talk about Florida. Of course, when Florida opened, Imagineers took the opportunity to expand Mr. Toad's into a much bigger experience. Now the Florida version, like I mentioned, it has 2 different tracks and they're completely independent. So there's basically 2 different rides at play here. Now on one side, they're slightly different than the other. So on one side, you might crash through a barnyard, for example. On the other, you'd careen through a gypsy camp, for example. Now, this gave the ride great replay value because, you know, if you went on the left side and you had fun, maybe you can go on the right side next. And you essentially experienced 2 different adventures. And the 2 tracks, although they didn't cross per se, they did interact with each other. So they both went through town square and you could see other cars making its way. So that really added to the immersion value. Of course, it had larger show buildings, more elaborate sets, and it became a fan favorite, remembered today as one of the most ambitious dark rides of its era. So most of you watching, I'm sure, remember the original Florida version of it. Of course, it's no longer with us today. We'll talk about that. But you can rest assured the original Disneyland one is still with us. Here's a picture of what the ride looks like if you haven't seen it. By the way, these maps are courtesy Park Lore. I love that website. They have phenomenal attraction maps. And you can see here, there are 2 different tracks. It looks like they might be careening into each other, but they don't actually touch. They just come very close to each other, especially in the town square section. So you can see one of the rides goes through the trophy room and kitchen and the fortune teller camp. The other one goes through a barnyard and chicken coop and places like that. So you have slightly different experiences depending on if you go on the left side or if you go on the right side. Now, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride in Florida, it wasn't just bigger, it was stranger. The dual track system gave Imagineers a lot of opportunity to add scenes that didn't exist in the Disneyland version. For example, like I mentioned, there's a gypsy camp at one point, complete with fortune tellers and carnival wagons. On the other side, you might crash through a barnyard, scattering chickens and cows and slapstick chaos. The courtroom was expanded. There was a scene with weasels that appeared more often, and the whole ride felt like a fever dream of plywood and paint. And we have one man to thank for that, and that is, of course, the famous Rolly Crump. Mr. Rolly, he definitely applied his personal touch to this attraction in Florida. And in a little bit, we'll actually, let's do it now. Let's put Rolly on stage and hear about his views on Mr. Toad.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was my favorite ride when that was Dick Nunes's idea. Did you know a story about Dick and I? And that Dick said, when we were getting ready to do dark rides for Florida, Dick came to me and he said, "Are you going to do Toad Ride?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, you're going to have to do 2 Toad rides," he said, "because that's the most popular dark ride in Disneyland." And so I said, "Well, I can't just do 2 identical ones." So that's when I merged the 2 of them together. So the cars would come in, one car would go to the right, the other car would go to the left, and then they would meet in town square, and then they would go this way and that way. And I thought it was kind of fun because I thought if families went on the ride, and somebody said, "Do you remember the chickens in the chicken coop?" "No, I don't remember any chickens in the chicken coop," because the family would see different scenes from the different parts of the ride. And I thought that was kind of fun. So I enjoyed doing that. And I was really, I don't know why they took it out. I mean, they needed space for something, so why not pick on the Toad Ride? Because it's the right size that they wanted, or the right square footage, or whatever, I don't know. Yeah. When I did that ride, I want to make sure that the characters look like the characters from animation, so I got an animator. I hired him to come in and do all the characters, because I knew that I couldn't do a job as good as the animator that actually did those. So I always called upon people that would do better. Okay. And that was the thing that Walt once said. He said he always wants to hire somebody that was better than he was. So I thought, yeah, that's right. So I'd always, if there was something that had to be, I didn't try to trace them. No, I brought them in. So that was great. Well, I actually designed the ride and built a model on it. So, you know, everything that we did was because Walt always wanted to see models because he wanted to see the 3D. So I actually designed a whole ride, you know, and did a model on it. And everything I ever did was a model. And then they showed it to Walt, and Walt loved that. That was kind of a given. You know, you didn't show Walt sketches all the time because, you know, he wasn't too happy about that.
Again, thanks to the retro WDW folks like Buena Vista Historical Society. This is just gold, and this is one of the reasons why I talk about retro magic all the time. It's just gold. Rolly was a good man. He was a dear friend of my father's. I remember running around his drafting table as a little kid in the office, and I wish at the time I had known how much he had brought to the parks, because as a wee little one, I would have definitely said thank you, thank you, thank you over and over again. I'm sure I did at one point, but yes, he was a good soul. So, of course, we have to talk about its closure. It was, as everybody knows, replaced by The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh in Florida. Now, in 1998, Disney announced the closure of Mr. Toad's, as Rolly alluded to. This decision kind of reflected a push for more recognizable, marketable IP. Yes, I said the word IP, sorry. Both Mr. Toad and Winnie the Pooh are both IP. However, one was perceived as more valuable than the other. So they decided to gut Mr. Toad's. And although they left a few Easter eggs here and there, they left tributes to Mr. Toad, including this picture that you see. So in case you haven't noticed, when you go through the owl barn and you start to see Owl talking, look to the left and you'll see this image of Mr. Toad handing the deed to Owl, which is a cute little Easter egg. Of course, does it make up for all of the things we lost? No, but the Easter eggs are nice to have. But we've got to talk about the closure, because it was one of the most famous closures in Disney history. There was a cult following and fan devotion about this ride. Now, when they closed it in 1998, fans didn't just shrug and say, oh, well, they actively fought back. There was an active campaign called Save Toad, and it became one of the first organized fan protests in Disney history. People dressed up, they had petitions, they had letters, and they even got together inside the park to have costume demonstrations. Now, for many people, this ride's humor and its infamous finale had made it more than just a dark ride. It was a cult classic in many sense of the word. Now, even today, fans gather for Toad-themed meetups and mark the anniversary of its closure. So in many ways, a passion for Mr. Toad, it really helped Disney realize just how deeply nostalgia for some of these attractions runs deep, and it fuels the bond between guests and the parks. Sometimes you see Disney lean a little bit too much on the nostalgia factor. We talked about that a little bit with Test Track 3.0. But, you know, there's a happy medium there. But if it weren't for the people behind this initiative, maybe Disney would have never gotten the message that, hey, these old rides matter. They're important to preserve in one form or another. Muppet Vision. No, sorry, I didn't say that, did I? I love this postcard, by the way. You can look up all the various Save Toad paraphernalia online, and it's remarkable to see. I got to talk about the guest experience a little bit. Of course, the whole experience is rather different, even though it's the same fundamental ride. Now, the guest experience differed dramatically. So, for example, in Anaheim, the ride was a single linear track. This was a condensed burst of chaos that whisked you from countryside to courtroom to hell in under 2 minutes. Florida's version, of course, doubled the fun with 2 different tracks. Each path had its own scenes, for example, and guests often describe Disneyland's version as kind of a slapstick sprint, but Magic Kingdom was more of a choose your own adventure kind of experience. Both versions captured the spirit of Toad very well, but in their own unique ways. And yes, I'm trying to tell you something, Neil. Speaking of, let me pop over to chat. Now, I haven't popped over to chat in a while and say hi to folks. Mr. Izzo's place is in the house. Hey, Izzo's. Hope you're doing great. Let's see. Nerdy Grandma is in the house. Hey, Nerdy Grandma. Patrick Julian. Karen Cook. I think I said hi, Karen. Hope you're doing great. Monorail Molly is in the house. Thank you for being here. And if I see more names, I will call you out. Please, folks, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, share out the stream. We are dangerously close to 500 if we're not already over it. So there's a question at play here. You know, why do we have this divergent experience? Why did Toad close in Florida, but it remains open in California? Now, Mr. Toad, of course, was lost to Winnie the Pooh in Florida, but the Anaheim version endured. Why is that? Well, a couple of reasons. First, it was an opening day attraction. It was woven into the DNA of the park from day one. Of course, Mr. Toad opened also on day one of Magic Kingdom, but of course, Toad has a much longer heritage and history in Disneyland proper. Its small footprint fit perfectly into Fantasyland's layout, and in fact, it's under most of the ride of Alice in Wonderland. So removing it would be challenging for many reasons. And Anaheim's Fantasyland already had rides like Alice, Pinocchio, and things like that to cover the fairy tale spectrum. Toad Slapstick Chaos really balanced and made the 2 halves of Fantasyland really work together. So when Fantasyland was famously redesigned in 1983, it wasn't just preserved, it was polished, and they built a proper Toad Hall for it, ensuring it would survive in California long after Florida's version was gone. So I'm grateful it still lives in California, and those of you who go to Disneyland can still enjoy it. Of course, it's a cult classic today. It lives on in Anaheim as more than just a dark ride. It's a piece of living history in many ways. Fans adore the slapstick humor, the simple plywood flats, and of course, the infamous scene through hell. Toad has also inspired merchandise as well, fan art, and even anniversary gatherings, cementing its place as a symbol of Disney nostalgia. For a lot of people, riding Toad is not just about the attraction, it's about connecting with Walt's opening day vision, and of course, the nostalgia of the ride from their own memories. Also, it embraces the park's willingness to be just a little bit weird, you know? No one can deny that finale through hell is just a little bit whimsical and weird. So we're grateful that it still exists today. I don't know, honestly, if we had built this attraction from scratch today, whether that scene would have made the cut. I doubt it very, very much. So I'm grateful that it still is with us. Mr. Toad's Wild Ride is more than just plywood and paint at the end of the day. It's a legacy in many ways. It opened an opening day in 1955, and it's delighted guests with chaos, humor, magic, and heart. Now, Florida's version may be gone, sadly, but its memory lives on in its fan devotion and its various tributes that we talked about. Both rides together remind us that imagination, not spectacle, and not budgets, is what make Disney magic endure. So to wrap, we got to talk about why this ride matters. Why is it that this simple ride, and I'll say it again, this very simple ride with 2D flats has captured the hearts of so many people? It matters because it shows us that Disney is at its best when it's being creative, surprising, and just a little bit mischievous. Limitations can spark brilliance. That's a key aspect of any good art. So having the limitations at play with a small budget, with that attraction, forced Imagineers to really exercise their artistry to a great degree, and we benefit from it today. In the end, Toad's Wild Ride is our wild ride. It's a reminder that joy, chaos, and imagination are worth preserving. So more than 70 years later, here we are. Mr. Toad's Wild Ride still is open in Fantasyland and Disneyland. People are going through hell at this very moment in Anaheim and taking guests to nowhere in particular. It's a ride that endures not because it's flashy, not because it has a big budget, but because it's the wildest, the weirdest, and most wonderfully human attraction that exists. And that's why the wild ride continues. Let's go into our usual analysis and talk about whether this ride truly works or not. Using our 3 axes, I'll start with immersion. And I start with an 8, a relatively good score, actually a great score. The theming, and you may ask me, John, at the end of the day, this is just a series of painted plywood. Why are you giving this such a high score for immersion? Well, let me go into it. The theming is perfect. It has a whimsical English countryside, slapstick London chaos, and it's conveyed perfectly. It's a consistent cartoon world. The motion is perfect for a dark ride. It's jerky. It's a darting ride vehicle. I'm not sure I mentioned earlier, but the turning radius is only 4 feet, so it feels like you're being whipped around, and it embraces a sense of chaos. The transitions, normally I would knock an attraction for this, but in this case it works. The scene changes are abrupt and they're theatrical, so they feel more like stage cuts than smooth transition, which really fits the cartoon tone. There were blacklight effects, sound cues. Of course, when you go through hell, you feel it. So in all senses, many of your senses are engaged. Of course, this ride never aimed for realism. It leans into exaggerated slapstick, and it immerses guests into a living cartoon. You really feel like you're part of that cartoon when you're riding it. It's very consistent from start to finish. It maintains its manic, tongue-in-cheek tone, and it doesn't break character. It has lots of surprises, of course, and surprises are key to immersion. The train crash, of course, and the famous finale are shocking twists that still catch first-time timers or first-time riders off their guard when they ride it for the first time. The visual effects, obviously very simple. Blacklight paint, forced perspective, and layered flats create depth, and yet it uses minimal technology to do so. The queue and pre-show is a little bit of a knock. The exterior facade sets the stage beautifully, but it really doesn't tell the story of Toad and why you're getting into this vehicle and going on a crazy ride. So I would knock it just a little bit for that. But on the whole, I feel that this ride does what it accomplishes. Storytelling, I'll give it a little bit lower. I give it a 6, which is still good. Don't get me wrong. But there are a few issues with it. The narrative loosely follows The Wind in the Willows, for those of you who know the story, but it prioritizes a chaos over a clear beginning, middle, and end that's key to any good story. So it feels more episodic than linear. In terms of role assignment, you're cast as reckless drivers like Toad himself, experiencing the world through his mischief. There were bold flats, caricatured characters, and crazy perspective that conveys a narrative without dialogue necessarily. So it really relies on that cartoon logic to really push the story to an end. This is a really hard one to analyze. What's the message of Mr. Toad? With that ending, I'm inclined to say some things. Now, it's less of a moral lesson, and it's more of a comic misadventure. It doesn't really make you feel bad at the end of the day about Toad's choices. Of course, that moral exists, but it's more like a gleeful embrace of chaos that, of course, ends with that famous finale. I already talked about the queue and pre-show. Does it fit in Fantasyland? It complements it. So it offers humor and slapstick mayhem along the other rides that are a little bit more serious. Now, finally, delight. We got to shoot for the moon here. People love, love, love this attraction. Why is that? Well, the whimsical Toad Hall facade immediately charms guests It's a great facade, especially the 1983 redo. It's an opening day attraction. How can you get better than that in terms of emotional connection and nostalgia? It truly has cult status. So it creates this nostalgic bond, especially for fans who see it as a living memorabilia piece of the original park. So that's core to people. It definitely nails the emotional connection side. Energy levels. I mean, yeah, it's a crazy ride. It maintains a frantic pace throughout. Many, many memorable features in this attraction. Of course, the finale we've talked about to no end. There's a chaotic courtroom, and of course, the motor cars barreling through the attraction make it unforgettable among all the dark rides in Disney parks. It's very original. I mean, I just need to mention the finale to comment on how original this attraction is, and it definitely embraces slapstick chaos. It's one of Disney's strangest and boldest attractions, and I think that's something that everybody here can agree with. Is it replayable? Well, it's a very short ride, and it's very rapid, so it encourages repeat rides. When you get off it, you may want to think, yeah, I want to ride it again. Now, of course, the single track doesn't provide that kind of obvious replayability that Florida did. When you rode the left side of the track in Florida, you might say, oh, I want to ride the right side next. Obviously, we don't have that in Anaheim. It's just one track throughout. Accessibility, it's pretty accessible, but it has very jerky motion, and it has some scary effects. So if you have very, very young children, it's probably not the best for them. It's a very short ride. It's under 2 minutes. It's brief but punchy, as those of you who saw the video can attest to. It's a whirlwind, and it leaves you wanting just one more go through the attraction. So all told, I give this ride 7.56. Not our highest, but a very respectable score. And the reason it may suffer a little bit in the rating system we set up, primarily through the storytelling aspect. This is a very episodic attraction where you're going through experiences instead of specific storytelling beats. And this kind of aligns with one of the changes that I might want to make on this show. For 19 episodes so far, we've been using these 3 axes as a model on how to evaluate attractions. Well, over the last few months, I've had the opportunity to talk to various people about, hey, are these 3 axes really the best way to tease an attraction apart and to evaluate it? I won't mention names, but a very famous Imagineer, I had a good talk with him about this aspect. And he said something that resonated with me. He said, John, storytelling is arguably one of the least important axes that you could focus on. And for me, coming from where I come from and my family, that took me for a shock. I thought, wow, I thought storytelling was critical. And it is critical when you come from the film industry. In the scope of attractions, which is what this show is ultimately all about, is storytelling paramount. When you exit an attraction, do you want to feel like you were told a great story and you live that story? Obviously, it accrues to how you feel about the attraction, but is it key? Is it critical? Is it worthy of one of these pillars? So starting next week, I'm going to adjust things a little bit. We're going to try something different, and we'll replace storytelling and see where it lands us. We're going to replace storytelling with a new pillar, one that I call audacity. How far do the Imagineers try to throw the rock? How far do they try to make this a truly unique experience? I think that's a pretty interesting axis. So for at least the next 10 episodes or so, we're going to try and tweak things a little bit. I never intended these 3 axes to be permanent, much like Walt said with the park. This will never be completed, and we'll see how it goes. Maybe it's the right approach, maybe it's not, but I think it makes sense. And I feel bad giving Mr. Toad this rating because we have to knock it in the storytelling aspect. I think everybody who comes through this attraction loves it. I mean, it's endured for 70 years for a good reason. So we need to think about whether these axes are really the right way to evaluate it or not. So forgive my experimentation. It'll be interesting to see. how this change to Audacity will change things, and we'll talk about it. So I talked about trivia question in the very beginning, and as some of you may have noticed, I talked about the Florida version having some slightly different experiences. Well, for those of you who remember it, the left side of this attraction had a ride through a gypsy scene. The right side of the attraction sent you through a barnyard with a bunch of animals. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. Mr. Toad is something that resonates very strongly with Disney fans, and it will remain in our hearts, and hopefully will remain open in Fantasyland in Anaheim for the indefinite future. Folks, we're at episode 19 on this show. Next episode is episode 20, and it's hard to believe we're there. What I like to do on this series is to make each major milestone, whether it's episode 10, when we had the 2-part on Spaceship Earth and the interview with Dad. Thank you, Dad, for doing that. I'd like to make these episodes a little bit more momentous than most. So there are a few key attractions that people have asked me about, and they say, John, when are you going to cover blah, 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 so-and-so? Well, I think it's time to tackle one of them. And next week is very opportune because next week we have a holiday called Halloween. So next week, let's go into the Haunted Mansion, shall we? I think this ride has so much history and so many facts and wonderful things behind it. We could arguably talk about this attraction for 2 or 3 parts, but we'll try and keep it concise, and we'll try to hit the keynotes here. So I hope you enjoy me in celebrating Halloween next week. We'll go through the Haunted Mansion together on Tuesday, and we'll see if the ride truly lives up to its lore or not. I'll close tonight by saying Ray Bradbury's famous quote, "Gather around the next great campfire, let us seek and know and understand, and dream a new book, a new instruction book to fly great spaceship Earth through the uncharted seas of the future world. Lock in a dream that is your own, find what truth is in your blood, and beat a path from here to there. Your life is yours to own and be. The world is yours to shape and change. The stars are yours as just reward." Thank you for joining me tonight. I hope to see you next week when we go through the Haunted Mansion together. Have a great week.